it doesn't matter what type of business you are, what scale of business you are, there's always something you can do. It's all about being that bit better. So
Right.
being more socially or environmentally responsible. So and there's lots you can do, right?
Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Helping People Perform. Joined today by an amazing guest, a good friend of mine, and someone I've been working with and talking with for the last year or so, strategy consultant with a focus on social value. Welcome to the show today, Paul Ioannou.
Hi, Paul, how are you doing?
Absolutely brilliant, mate, and really looking forward to this because I know we've talked a lot about sort of some of the crossovers between what we do and being able to introduce each other to various people, I think some of the elements of what you do is so interesting and so intriguing for businesses in general, and we're going to come to that in terms of the social value element. But I want to start off with what got you to where you are today. So can you tell us a little bit about your backstory?
Oh, it's I guess I've had a career in three parts really. The first part was I used to be a forensic scientist, a DNA profiling expert witness, and I guess that came from an unhealthy interest in real crime when I was a teenager. But what that did was it kind of set out, that was the goal, right? To be a
Right,
forensic scientist. That was the career I always wanted. And that set out my plan for GCSEs, A levels, degrees. I did a master's, all of that with that goal in mind.
right,
Um, and I got there and I did that for a few years. And actually, the reality of forensics isn't really silent witness or CSI. It's mostly you get a big pile of cases in the morning and you have to get through them each day. And the work that I did was pretty kind of low level crimes, so like stolen cars and burglaries. And the exhibits you'd be sent in were like a cigarette butt or a swab of blood. So
right.
there was nothing like it wasn't sort of like exciting, I don't know, going to crime scenes and all that kind of stuff. But what did happen was my company bought one of their competitors, and they asked for a group of people to work on the integration of those two businesses. And I put my hand up very naively, and we did lots of really cool stuff like process mapping and org design. I was like, is this actually a real job? Can I do this in the real world?
Yeah,
Well, yeah, it's called consulting. I was like, oh, okay. So in those days, EY were rebuilding their consultancy practice basically
right.
from scratch. And a friend of mine managed to get me an interview in the strategy practice. And that's kind of when I applied and got the job, and I worked in the EY strategy practice for about probably about 9 years in total. So my focus was mostly on sort of target operating models and transformation programs,
Right.
and almost all of my clients were government clients or public sector clients. So lots of the big government departments, lots of local authorities, a few kind of secret squirrel security agencies, and I really enjoyed that. And actually, that time at EY was what ignited my interest in social impact.
Right.
So when I first arrived, people would kind of go, I'd say, oh, so what do we do in terms of volunteering? And in those days, in the kind of the late 90s, the late 2000s, it was like, well, we're going to dig a garden, or we're going to paint a fence, or we do that kind of stuff, that the traditional CSR thing. So I was like, guys, you've got some of the best people in the world at what they do in this building. Let's try and find ways that we can use those skills more effectively. So I kind of, me and a few other people created a little group of social entrepreneurs, we called ourselves,
Right.
that try to like leverage some of that and try to make it a bit more structured and formal. And I just love doing all of that type of work. So yeah, so I was consulting for I don't know, nearly 10 years. And then kind of towards the end, I was just getting a bit jaded with it. So all the travel, all of
Mm.
the kind of focus on revenues and chargeability, and actually just working on some of like these big transformation programs are always high profile. So like, I don't know, universal credit or a big kind of IT implementation at a big department. It's all pretty kind of high pressure and just quite difficult environments to work in. So it kind of took
Mm.
its toll on me generally. But very luckily for me, in 2017, EY did a round of redundancies in the consultancy business, and I very gladly took that. And I left with money in my pocket and kind of a smile on my face, and
Right.
genuinely really good relationships off the having left on really good terms. So that's kind of like the second transition. And the third part of my career was I decided to set up as a freelancer, as kind of a solopreneur.
Yeah.
Um, and and that's kind of what I do now, which is a real focus on social impact. But like I say, a lot of relationships that I had back in EY are really strong, and probably 90% of my work has actually been back into EY, either as a kind of a subcontractor to deliver client work for them or to work on internal projects with them.
Right.
So quite a potted history, a
Yeah.
career in three parts, I guess.
I mean, hugely interested in that whole view of. I love the backstories of people because you never know where it's going to come from, and that element we've chatted about it before, the sort of forensic piece. It's completely different, or is seen as completely different to any of the consulting world and things like. What are some of the skills? What are some of the things that you picked up in the world of forensics that maybe stick with you today, or certainly did in the consulting time?
Yeah, I mean, attention to detail is like the absolute thing, like, and the ability to think in a structured way.
Right.
So I say a lot of the cases were pretty low level, but for example, there was one I worked on one murder in the entire 5 years that I was doing forensics, and it was a someone was stabbed in a nightclub, and in those days people could smoke in nightclubs, and
Right.
so you can imagine that an emergency situation, everyone bails out of the nightclub,
Mm.
leaving their cigarettes, their bottles, their drinks, and you kind of go, okay, well, we think it happened here. So you literally have to sit down with the police officers, and I guess that's another skill set, stakeholder management, which
Right.
is they really are reliant on you and your advice to move forwards in the case. So you go, these are the types of things that I think would be important. These are the exhibits that I think we should examine first. These are and you so there's a bit of kind of the structured approach, the stakeholder management, and I guess analytics. That was always
Right.
something that through the early part of my time at EY, being able to take huge data sets. I mean, in those, it's very different to what people would do today, but take data sets and interpret it in a way that could draw insights out of it to
Yeah.
then communicate to a client that this is what we think
Mm.
the next step should be, or this is what we think you should be doing in future. So yeah, it's kind of those are there's some stuff that was transferable. In fact,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I had to do in the interview, was to try and kind of go. I did lots of strategy stuff, and lots, I say the word strategy a lot when I'm in an interview for as a strategy
Yes.
consultant. So yeah, I guess they bought it, and it really helped me.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, just a little nugget there, a little top tip for anyone going into the interview process is get the words that your your potential employer is saying, get those into your language as soon as you can. And it's amazing how much
Absolutely.
that connects you, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that's fascinating in terms of there's a world here of forensics, there's a world of consulting and strategy consulting in particular, and just the ability to connect what are the things that matter in this world that I can actually add value in that world and have a differential value because not everybody, very few people indeed, will have come from the world of forensics. So it's you're adding that diversity of thinking to the team as well. So wonderful stuff. So tell me a bit then about social value and in terms of getting into who you help and how you help them today. But I want to start off with what do you mean when you say social value? You mentioned CSR earlier on, which isn't CSR. I know that much. So maybe if you can explain those things for me and the audience, me
Yeah,
mainly.
so I mean, there's so much terminology in this space, right? So you've got ESG and you've got CSR and you've got social impact, social value, and so on. So social value for me is basically helping people, the impact on people and communities, really. So I know enough about the environmental side to be dangerous. So, and there's lots of expertise in that space, but it's very technical and very complex
Right.
to be able to go into a client and give them actual advice or support in that space. um it really helps to have that background and to have developed it. um so yeah, for me it's the people element, so that includes things like health and well-being, it includes good work and jobs and those kind of
Mm.
elements, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of those social outcomes that are important to me and also important, I think, in the world. And we probably don't focus enough on that when we talk about ESG in particular. I can talk
Right.
about that if you want.
Yeah. I mean, ESG, so environmental, social, and
governance.
Governance. Yeah. So what my experience, because I've coming from a manufacturing background as well, the environmental bit was always a big thing because generally you've got big plants creating, if nothing else, sort of dirty water that needs to go back into the water system from cleaning your plants or whatever it might be. What are some of the elements of ESG that are important there, and what does that mean to businesses?
Yeah, so like I say, the majority the agenda's gone up in people's kind of minds at the moment. There's a lot more roles in ESG going around. There's a lot more focus on it at board level. But my experience is a lot of that focus is on the E of ESG, the environmental side. And in fact, the majority of the focus is on climate change and carbon, which obviously is important. But there's so many other kind of environmental elements like biodiversity, water quality, other things that organizations don't tend to look at. And that's primarily driven by that's where the reporting frameworks are. That's where kind of regulatory requirements tend to sit. So, but and equally on the social side, there's a lot of the main focus is on human rights and diversity, equity, and inclusion, which, like I say, are also super important. But it does forget about things like health and well-being and good communities and other kind of like how do we make sure that people have good jobs or access to good jobs and quality and cost of living crisis. All of those things sit within the social bucket. But it'd be very rare to go to a big corporate and see a really well-developed component of their ESG being focused on the social piece. And the governance piece is kind of an area that, again, is a bit outside of my expertise, but there's focus on that, and it's really about regulatory and reporting and all that kind of stuff that is, I mean, frankly, less interesting to me. It's the social bit that I get really, really excited and kind of out of bed each day.
Right. Oh, brilliant. And you mentioned there about corporates. Is this something that is just a focus for corporates, or is this equally as applicable no matter what the size of your business, or are there certain limits at which it becomes a requirement? Who does it matter to?
I think it matters to everyone, and there's a bit of a continuum, really. You can do what you can do. So if I like working with like big international businesses because they're the ones that have got the resources that they can throw at this to make the biggest change. And I remember being in a meeting many years ago with some of the partners in the government practice at EY and saying to them, there isn't a single global problem that a place like EY couldn't solve if that's all you did.
Right.
So they have, I don't know, 300,000 people, skill set across finance, consulting, supply chain, anything, all the skill sets in the world you can imagine. They could solve world hunger if that's all they did with their people for 5 years, for example. So I love, I mean, obviously they're never going to do that, but that's the opportunity is there to leverage some of those resources. But that's not to say that like an SME or a startup can't do that as well. So, I mean, B Corps. I mean, have you come across B Corps and the concept?
No, I was going to ask you about that because I know of B Corps, but tell us a bit more about B Corps.
So B Corps are kind of organizations that what's the word? They're assessed on a set of criteria that tells people that they are a social and environmentally responsible business. And so you go through an assessment process, you get an accreditation, and you can say I'm a B Corp. And that can be any business of any size. But what it does do, it enshrines that kind of people, planet, profit concept within your organization, and you actually have to change your articles of association to reflect that.
Okay.
So there's that the number of B Corps certainly in the UK has just exponentially it's exploded. Like every day on my LinkedIn thing, I get another company that I'm familiar with that says, "Oh, we've just got our B Corp certification." But what that does is it allows you to focus on being a good business, so socially and environmentally responsible business from the start. If you're a two-person business and you go, okay, this is important to us, every decision we make is going to be based on that kind of stuff. So it might be the type of the amount of holiday you give your staff, or the type of holiday, where you work, or the flexibility, or it might be which types of clients you want to work with or don't want to work with. And they're really exciting people organizations to work with from my perspective, because whilst the big businesses have loads of opportunity, they're like massive oil tankers that you have to try and shift both
Mm.
culturally, process wise, all sorts of stuff. So to start telling a massive law firm that you're not going to work with any oil and gas companies anymore and you're going to lose 15% of your overall annual revenue is really complex and difficult because of the way the partnership model works. Whereas if you are setting up like a startup and the leadership team are all aligned in terms of what they want to do and what they want to achieve, then that's much easier. The decision making process is much easier.
Right. And B Corp provides, from what I've seen anyway, that sort of framework for, if you want to do this, here's something, a way of thinking about it, because we're going to assess you on this. You
Yeah,
can start to think about all those different elements that are within that. Um,
absolutely.
and there's a similar bit, if I'm right, on from the UN in terms of their priorities as well. Can you tell us a bit about
Yeah.
that?
So the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I think that's what you're referring to. So there's 17 global goals on there that range from kind of no poverty to life on land and
Right.
all sorts of different they're macro goals, and then there's measures underneath those.
Mm.
And I actually use that quite often with clients to sort
Right.
of help them understand what's important to them as a business. So what is
Mm.
the social change that they're trying to make in the world? What's the outcome they're trying to achieve?
Right.
And if you use those goals as a starting point, as a framework, they might go, okay, well, no poverty. That's really important to us as a
Mm.
business. And then when you start to unpick that with them and go, so what does that mean for your business very specifically?
Yep.
So it might be, okay, we're a Manchester-based organization, no poverty in Manchester. That's a good starting point. Okay,
Right.
so what do you do as a business? Oh, we do, I know, life sciences. Okay, well, how does that translate into that goal? Like, how do you create a goal that's much
Mm.
more specific and tailored to your business that you can really start to take people on that journey with you? But the UN development, there's so many different frameworks out there. It's not really, I use them as a framework, as a guidance,
Yeah.
like a guide rail, rather than as a we're going to solve world poverty. It's not
Yeah.
really it's that, and I don't think that's what they're there for, really, is to like, it's
It's
more
like,
of a
where's your organization aligned to? And when I've seen it in action, it's more, one of the big concerns that businesses have is, we've got to do all these 17 things. This is far too much for me as a small organization to try and, solve all these problems. But that's not really the case, is it, in terms of what they're there
no.
for in intent?
I mean, it's the same. And when I talk about doing kind of social impact strategy, it's the same as any other strategy. You could say, oh, we could achieve all these things. I imagine your background in the sausage business and in F1, you don't set goals that are all like, okay, we're going to win the F1 championship this year. We're going to win the constructors championship. We're going to win it for the next 10 years. We're going to, like, you don't have like this list of endless goals that you want to
Mm.
achieve. You set some key goals and then you work out what those performance measures underneath and how you're going to, what the things you're going to do to achieve those goals. And that's exactly what I do from a social impact strategy. Is like, what's that end goal?
Right.
Then you kind of get down to the next layer of, well, what resources do you have? What's unique to you that you can put to work to achieve those goals? So it might be things like pro bono, or it might be things like in-kind donations. It might be cash. It might be volunteer. All of those, and I have like a very structured framework that I use with people to make sure they don't sort of miss anything off or or neglect to consider something.
Mm.
But again, it's not like you have to do all of these things. You have to have like a world-class volunteering program, and you have to give millions of pounds into charity and a foundation, and you need to have like a really complex supply chain and loads of measurements in there as well. So again, it's about what's really important to it. And I guess an example is when I went, one of my favorite projects ever was going back to EY, and I was the strategy and design lead for EY Ripples, which was their transformation of the way they did social impact.
Okay.
And the main focus for that, so again, we worked out the things that were important to them was supporting impact entrepreneurs, so social enterprise, working with the next generation of the workforce, and supporting kind of environmental improvement. And then we kind of went, okay, well, the main thing that we've got is a lot of people with some unbelievable skills. So it was really focused around kind of in-kind and pro bono and volunteering. And we designed all the program focused on that. And then like the next layer down of the strategy is, well, what's the operating model or the people, processes, technology that we need in place to make that happen?
Mm.
So it's kind of, it's all well and good saying we want to have I don't know, 1,000 people volunteering a year, but actually how do they find out about opportunities? How do they access those opportunities? How do they get onboarded? How do they get feedback? How do they, what's the, like all of that stuff? Is there a platform for doing that, or is it a team of people? So trying to work through all of that process and treating it like a real transformation program at EY in particular was really exciting. And that's what I bring to clients from a strategic perspective in terms of social impact.
Brilliant. So if people are working with you in terms of the independent work that you do now, you mentioned you still do a lot of work with EY, but if we look at all your general client base, what sort of engagement, what would that engagement look like when working with you, and what could they expect?
Yeah, and I guess a lot of what I do, so strategy is not, and I don't think it's been like this for many years, right? It's not where you go, I'm very clever, I'm going to come and tell me everything about your business, and I'll come back with a PowerPoint presentation in a few weeks' time.
Yeah.
It's never, in my experience, it's never been like that. What it is I run lots and lots of workshops, write some of the stuff down that they have in their heads. I mean, it seems a bit like noddy, but a lot of stuff that's in their heads that isn't, they're good ideas, and it's not structured in a way that makes sense. So I bring that framework to say, okay, let's run a workshop on the top part of this picture, which might be what's the goal that we're trying to achieve. Then we'll run a workshop maybe on volunteering, so there's a lot of it is facilitation, all of it's dialogue, a lot of it is helping them corral stakeholders and message to stakeholders what's important. So when I talk about social impact, obviously something has to give in that kind of like graphic equalizer of financial value, social value, people value, client, all of that kind of up and down. It's going to cost you some money, so you're going to have to go and write a business case for it. So I can tell you what to put in this business case based on my experience that will be valuable to you. So yeah, I mean that's the way I go about my business, is helping, just facilitating primarily and writing some stuff down that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and bringing that structured approach is a huge amount of value to organizations who, as you say, you might have individuals who've all got these great ideas as to things that are important to them. You know, I'm talking from my own experience here, but it might be around a personal bit where maybe some family member is has a particular type of care or issue. You might be part of a community group or something that you want the business to work towards. But actually, how do you get that business to do that? And is that appropriate for the business? How do we get the story told and the momentum behind it to really shift the dial? And I think having somebody who's got the experience of helping people through that is going to be an invaluable service. So hats off to you on that stuff.
I know, I really enjoy it. And I guess that's one of the reasons I like working in this space is the people.
Right.
So the type of people you come across, whether it's in corporates where people are kind of engaged in this agenda, and like they might be in the CSR team or the ESG team, they're always very smart, very passionate, very empathetic, and they're basically the kind of people I like to hang out with. So it's always they're always a good client. It's very rare that you kind of go, like you don't get many nasty people in this space. So let's put it that way.
Right. No, good. And yeah, some amazing work, and I really encourage people to reach out. We'll talk a bit more about that towards the end as well. But to find out more and find out what you can do, because there's so much that it can do, even at a small level, that has a big difference and a big leverage point. So, I want to talk a little bit about, as a consultant, you're always helping other people, and this whole podcast is about helping people perform. But I always like to ask my guests, how do you help yourself perform? What are the things that keep you on top of your game?
That's a really interesting question, and it's certainly changed from when I was a forensic scientist and when I was at EY.
Right.
So in those days, you would have a lot of development opportunities presented to you, and it was really up to you to grab hold of them.
Yep.
Whereas now, and you'll recognize this, there's always that trade-off between chargeable like delivery, doing the chargeable stuff that brings the money in, business development, and then you kind of go, okay, so what time is left for me to improve myself?
Right.
So there's a trade-off in there, but it's something that I absolutely keep that time for. And I guess there's so much more for me to learn. Both, I mean, I talked about kind of the environment side, it's like very technical and difficult. I've still got to learn some of that to keep relevant, and there's a lot of development in the social space that I just need to keep up to date with. and also kind of emotionally as well, like just how I present myself and how I kind of come across. Like I'm certainly not the finished article in terms of being a consultant. There's lots of development areas that I've still got. So I mean, in terms of the actual specific tools, I read loads. So that's the easiest and the cheapest way to develop yourself, is in my view. So whether it's blogs or books or whatever, and podcasts as well. I love a podcast. Or whenever I'm exercising or traveling, I've always got a podcast on the go. So and there's all sorts of different whether they're technical ones or kind of things that are like more just more general things. And they're not always sort of like I don't only listen to business podcasts or things that are going to help me through the day, but they kind of balance me out in different ways. I guess I've done one paid for training course, which was pretty expensive overall, and that was on being a design sprint facilitator, which was just another, it was like a real kind of practical process. And whilst I don't run too many design sprints end to end anymore, almost all of the components are really helpful. There's like some brilliant facilitation tips, and there's some really good structured exercises that you might use, and that's paid for itself like 10 times over now at least. And I guess the most important way of self-improvement is the networks that I'm part of, and you and I are part of the Solopreneurs Network, which is that kind of that group of one person organizations, and we help each other with whether it's a shoulder to cry on or a virtual fist pump, but a lot of kind of networks and connections and just sharing tips and hints. I mean, we went from, I think we started off with maybe 5 or 6 of us. Now there's at least 30, 40 people that might join us once a month. And we've all been through some of that pain that these people that are just starting out on their careers are experiencing. And even and the idea of having people from different backgrounds and different industries is incredibly helpful. So we're not all consultants, we're not all, there's some coaches in there, and you go, okay, well, I need to find my client's asking for a coach. That's really helpful. Or how do you do this in your industry? All of that stuff is really important. And I guess the other network that I've got is the one that I built up at EY. So a lot of my peers are now either partners at EY or in other firms, which is brilliant, obviously, for kind of creating business opportunities, but also like they are a version of my general client as well. So you can go and say, okay, I'm not trying to sell this to you specifically at EY, but I've got this new offer that I just wanted to test with someone. Would you mind giving me some honest feedback on it and see how it lands and what you would change about that? So that's kind of all of those things are simple, cheap ways of me learning and growing every day. And I guess there's probably two gaps that I would like to do something about this year. The first is I feel like I kind of need more of a formal mentor or coach. Sometimes I can get lazy. So it might be, okay, here's my to-do list. I've got all these contacts I need to get in touch with. But actually, I sometimes don't hold myself to account as well as I could do. So it'd be nice to have an external voice that's not my wife nagging me, because that's kind of how it can feel sometimes. Because even though she's absolutely right, it kind of sometimes you want someone who's like going to tell you off in a different way. And the other side of it is to kind of, I often, when times are quiet, I might flip-flop between things and kind of go, okay, this is what I'm going to try and achieve. Here's the plan. And then I might go, okay, that's not working. So now I need to, so having someone else to kind of go, actually stick at it for a bit longer, or maybe you're right, you should be swapping over the focus right now. I think that would be really helpful. I'm not entirely sure whether I need a mentor or a coach yet, but I'm going to speak to lots of people, certainly within the Solopreneurs Network, that might be able to help me work out which one and potentially be that coach. And I guess the second thing is, I know a few people that have been on kind of startup accelerators and like small business accelerators. And I'm wondering whether that would be valuable to me, just to get some more technical skill set, and also that broaden that network as well in a different direction with different organizations. So those are the two areas of focus that I think I'll put on in terms of my own performance and over the next few months.
I mean, that's certainly, I applaud you for the sort of self-reflection and identifying those gaps. I think is a big thing that people can be blind to, but also, quite often you know it, but you're not challenging yourself as to really, is that something I need to do something about? But those tips that you said about reading, reading, listening to podcasts, and reading blogs and things like that. As you say, a really cheap and useful thing that anybody can go out and start doing. And the network piece, I just did a solo podcast episode recently on collaboration and the value of being able to work with others. And even if it's not working with them, it's having that opinion to bounce off people, or someone's got a little bit of experience. Pick up a little tool here or there. It's just like, right, if you're going to be starting off a webinar in the next couple of weeks, it's like, I found this framework really helpful. I found that approach really good. Look at this training here. Just the stuff that you're not aware of. If you're too focused on your own thing, it can be a detrimental to your performance.
Absolutely. I think it's sometimes, so I'm sat in my office today on my own. I might get an email saying, oh, we'd like you to come and work with us for the next 6 months. And it's like this big victory, this big win that you get. You sort of look around and go, who am I going to tell? But sometimes it's nice to have that network of people who go, oh, I've just done it. And you go, oh, well done, great stuff. So it kind of gives you that momentum and that support. And I find that, and I think on the reading front, it's not always like you don't read the book to take it all in and to understand everything. Kind of I've done that part. Sometimes it just triggers a thought and you go, that's another reason why. So when I'm talking to a client about this, I might say, here's another element that might benefit you if you did this right, because I read it in this book. You might take away one sentence or one paragraph from that book, but you kind of need to just keep taking stuff in to be able to move forwards.
Oh, wonderful stuff. And let's try changing the angle a little bit in terms of you talk about clients and working with clients. In terms of who you would like to help with the skill set and the experience that you've got, who would you like to help perform?
I mean, this is a really easy one. So I'm absolutely passionate about sport, and in particular rugby. And one area, one client that I would love is the RFU, so English Rugby, to help them get strategic about social impact. So, the rugby landscape in England is a bit of a basket case. I guess it's not really much of a secret, but there's so much value in being a rugby player at any level, or being involved with a rugby club in the community and those kind of things. There's lots of good resources that they deploy to help drive social impact,
right?
Through rugby, but it's very piecemeal. So it's kind of like they'll tell the story around play rugby because it's good for your health and well-being, but they won't necessarily talk about, well, actually, what could we do in terms of growing local businesses and helping create jobs behind the bar at a rugby club, like all these kind of different elements that they could support and cascade down. So they could have like a strategic framework and cascade that down to make it available to lots of grassroots clubs. That would be the dream client and the dream gig. I've had conversations around it in the past, but it's just one of those things that kind of is going to take a long time and a bit of a burning platform to make happen.
Right. No, wonderful. And I know you do some work with an organization in the sporting arena already with Future Proof. Maybe tell us a little bit about those guys and what you do with them.
So Future Proof are amazing. So it's set up by a couple of guys. One was a former England rugby player. He had a couple of caps, a guy called Tom May, and another guy called James Hitchman, who comes from a recruitment background. Right. And they sort of came together and were like, actually, there's a big gap here supporting athletes when they retire, transition into kind of sustainable employment. Yeah. And I came across them just on LinkedIn, actually. And I came across a post of theirs, and what they were describing from an athlete's perspective was very similar to what I see in the work that I do. So it might be working with young people from a disadvantaged background. They face very similar barriers to employment. So a lack of a network, a lack of understanding of the job market, a lack of the kind of the skill set around applying and identifying roles that are suitable for them and creating CVs, and a lack of a LinkedIn all of that stuff is very, very similar. And I was like, well, I've designed programs very specifically tailored to address those problems. Maybe I can help you do the same. Right. And that's how I got involved. So now I kind of work with them on a kind of a program design and delivery perspective that tries to really nail down what those barriers are and the interventions that we can put in place to work with it, whether it's a football club or a rugby club. And my like I say, my real passion is actually kind of women's sport. And I think now is the time to be investing in women's playing careers to prepare them for that transition down the line. So Tom and James are fantastic to work with. They've got some incredible contacts. They've got some incredible opportunities going forwards, and it's just something that I'm really enjoying being part of.
Oh, wonderful stuff. Wonderful. And yeah, if we've got anybody listening from the RFU as well, pull your finger out and contact Paul here. So if let's switch that question over a little bit then, in terms of if you could sit down, have a drink, have a meal with somebody that you think you could learn from that would really lift your performance, who would you want that to be?
I don't know. Do people normally say like Gandhi or David Attenborough or something?
Oh,
Someone with kind of like
we've had all sorts, mate, all
so,
sorts.
someone like Martin Luther King or something like that. But and I mean mine is probably much more practical, I guess. So I spent a bit of time a year or so ago working with Lane 4, who are like a
Yes.
leadership and learning development company,
Yeah.
and they were merged into EY again, and I worked on the integration of those two. And the leadership of Lane 4 in particular, the guys that came over were
Yeah.
just exceptional, like really kind of inspirational, experienced, like really technically capable. But we spent an awful lot of the time talking about how can we help them create a team that's going to be high performing. How can we build their work on their performance? It would be amazing to spend a little bit of time with that leadership team
Yeah.
to help them kind of to help me perform and help me understand how I can improve my performance, because a lot of them have sort of both sporting heritage as individuals and psychology background,
Yes.
and a few of them have a bit of both. So
Yeah.
it's such a really powerful kind of leadership and performance development kind of combination to bring. So I
Yeah.
mean, and again, I'd encourage people to work with them if they can.
Mm.
But they'd be the ones that I would love to sit down and spend some time talking about me rather than
Yes.
talking about them and their business.
Yeah, I had the privilege of working with Lane 4 at my time at McLaren, and so let's give a big shout out to Paul Langton Rose and Andrew Gillespie, who I worked with a little while back. But yeah, it's an amazing team, as you say, and the expertise and the ability to drive that expertise in a meaningful manner and an engaging manner. I don't think I've worked with many businesses better than that. So yeah, I certainly hear you on that one.
Right.
um, so I've got one final question before we talk about how people find out how to contact you, which is if you had one lesson or one thing that people should leave thinking about regarding social impact and social value, what's the one thing you'd like them to leave this podcast considering or thinking about?
I guess the big one is it doesn't matter what type of business you are, what scale of business you are, there's always something you can do. It's all about being that bit better. So
Right.
being more socially or environmentally responsible. So and there's lots you can do, right? So it's not just about giving money to charity or running a bake sale. But if that's what your capacity allows you to do it, right? It's doing something in the right direction. But there's lots of other things. I mean, if anyone ever wants to just pick up the phone to me or drop me a note and say, okay, we're like a two-person business doing medical sales, right?
Right.
What could we do?
Right.
I'll send you the framework. You can have it for free. Have a look at it, tick it off, and see if there's anything in there that you can do that's that can add value. I mean, I that's the one thing is doesn't matter how big you are, doesn't matter how small you are. There's always something you can do.
Brilliant, brilliant, a great lesson for any of us. And so, I mean, that flows nicely. Then, how do people get in touch? Where do they go to find out more about what you do and get in touch with you?
I mean, absolutely the best place is LinkedIn.
Right.
So look me up on LinkedIn, and it's you'll see hopefully some interesting posts. I do a lot of kind of replying to other people's posts, which triggers conversations. It's always a nice way to operate, because
Yeah.
I don't know it all. I don't just chuck out kind of content out there that's like this is how you should do it. There's a few bits and pieces, a lot of kind of snippets of my experience that I put out there that hopefully is useful to some people. But absolutely, just drop. I connect with anyone who wants to connect with me. I will talk about this for hours and hours on end, and I love it. So reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's absolutely the best place to find me.
And I can't recommend that enough, and I continue to recommend Paul for any of the organizations where I see even a glimmer of opportunity in here. So do get in touch. Paul, as always, absolutely fascinating and really appreciate you sharing, one, to educate me and the audience a little bit about what social value, social impact is, but more inspiration about what we can do and the things that we can do to move things forward and make a difference. So thanks for being on the show today, Paul Ioannou.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.